The introduction to the story. In this session, let us discuss the main story of the lesson Too Dear. It is a short story that presents the case of an offender and satirizes the impractical measures taken by those in power in dealing with it. How the king failed to deal with the criminal, that is discussed in the story, and also it satirizes the impractical measures taken by those who are in power. How they failed to give a punishment to the criminal, and since they wanted to get rid from the criminal, what are some of the ways they opted to deal with the criminal? Let us discuss. That is very interesting, and also you can, if you read it with the with comparing it to the reality, you can understand what is going on in present situation also. It is nothing different from present situation. The kingdom of Monaco is a small kingdom, and the king of Monaco, he is a failed king. The same situation we can find in the countries of the world where the king, where the head of or the authorities of the countries, they failed to deal with some of the criminals. Look at the objectives. The unit or the lesson that aims to sensitize or to alert or to explain the reader or the learners about the whims and fancies. Whims and fancies in the sense impulses or urges and dreams and fantasies of the ruling class. What are the impulses? What are the urges, or what are the dreams, or what are the fantasies of the ruling class, and make them reflect on how these affect the governments. The fancies, the impulses of the ruling class, how it affects the society or the subject or the governance, that is explained nicely in this lesson. It also makes them aware of the vanity of human greed for power and the futile means of exercise. It also shows the vanity of human greed, vanity in the sense narcissism or egotism or big-headedness, how they wanted or how they are greedful. Vanity of human greed for power and the futile in the sense useless or fruitless means of exercise. How even the country, if even the kingdom, if it has the particular rules or regulation, how that was fruitlessly or uselessly that was used by the king or the ministers for their human greed. Let us look at this short summary of the lesson. Everything was well in the kingdom of Monaco. As I said, the kingdom was spread between France and Italy. It has only 60 men's army, and it has only 7,000 inhabitants. Though it was a small kingdom, it has a real kinglet, courtiers, generals, then ministers, bishops, everything, and it has the source of revenues such as poll tax, the tax on spirit, tobacco and wine. Then the special source of the kingdom was the gaming house or roulette, and here the king was getting more part of the income from the gaming housekeeper, and everything was fine in this kingdom until the murder was committed by a murderer. All was well in the kingdom of Monaco until a man commits a murder. In such a small kingdom, in such a small kingdom, everything was fine. But once what happened? A murder committed by a murderer. Now, since there is a criminal, the kinglet and the kingdom has to deal with the criminal. In a small kingdom, it is very easy to find out the criminal and to punish him. The same thing they wanted to do, but what happens? Let us see. The king had never had to deal with a murderer before. Why? Because till there such kind of things not happened. And after the judicial process had run its course and the man had been sentenced to death. Since the man committed murder, the murderer or the criminal was proceeded to the court, and there the case was discussed and the judicials or the lawyers or barristers, they discussed about the case, and finally they decided, or the verdict came as to sentence the criminal to death. He runs into considerable trouble trying to carry it out the sentence, but the king or the kinglet, he had a big problem, or he had a big obstacle to carry out this death sentence to the criminal, or to execute that death sentence on the criminal. So, what is the problem? Let us see. Since it was a small kingdom, it was full of problems. Here, the problem is this: Monaco had no guillotine and no executioner. So, they asked the government of France to see if they could borrow them. So, what is this guillotine and executioner? Guillotine is an apparatus designed for efficiently carrying out executions by beheading. It is a machine to cut the man's head off who is sentenced to death. The device consists of a tall upright frame in which a weighted and angled blade is raised to the top and suspended. So, here the blade was raised and then it was suspended, so that while falling it could cut the man's head. So, this is called a guillotine, which is essential to give or to implement this death sentence to the criminal. Then, since there is no guillotine, there was no executioner also. Executioner in the sense one who operates the machine, that is a guillotine. What to do? This is the big problem. This is the big hitch to the kingdom and also to everyone, those who decided to give death sentence to the criminal. So, they decided to borrow it from the neighboring government, that is from France, and they sent a letter to the France government to whether they were willing to borrow their machine, or whether they are willing to send the machine. France agreed to lend the machine, but they demanded 16,000 francs for it. France offers to send a guillotine and an executioner for 16,000 francs. Here the government, the kingdom of Monaco, has to pay 16,000 francs to the French government to deal with the criminal, because if they want the machine and the executioner, they must get it from there. What is the decision of the kingdom? This would require laying more taxes. So, the king tries requesting help from the king of Italy, but the cost would only be somewhat lower at 12,000 francs. This was 16,000 francs was too costly to whom? To the kingdom of Monaco, because the kingdom of Monaco, it is struggling to feed its courtiers and to run the kingdom, and 16,000 francs in the sense they have to collect more taxes from the people. So, there was a threat of people's revolt against the kingdom. That is why the king of Monaco, he was afraid to put more taxes on people. He did not want to get down from his seat. So, it was too expensive to the kingdom, it was too dear to the kingdom, and they decided to ask another neighboring country, that is Italy, and the kingdom of Italy is treated as brother monarch of a kingdom, and French government, it was a republican government, it did not have respect on Monaco. Why? Because still there is a king is ruling, and since Italy has the rule of king, they decided to ask Italian government, and Italian government agreed to give the executioner and a guillotine, and somewhat lower than French, that is 12,000 francs. Did the king agree to take the guillotine or executioner from Italy? Let us see. The decision is made to simply keep the murderer imprisoned for life. No, the king did not agree to borrow the machine and executioner from whom? From Italy. Why? Because 12,000 francs is also more to him. He thought that it would be less, but it was more to whom? The king of Monaco. Then what to do? The only way left to him was the decision was simply that was changed to imprisonment for life. Since the man was not worth to spend 12,000 francs or 16,000 francs, because he was a murderer, the king felt that it is waste to spend such money on the criminal just to kill him. Look at the king's way of thinking. He felt this is useless to spend on such kind of a bastard or such kind of a murderer, he says. Then because of that, he wanted to change that decision, that is imprisonment for life. Then life imprisonment, however, presents its own set of problems. Whether he could successfully give a punishment, life imprisonment for the criminal, no, even that has some problems. What are the problems? There needs to be a guard at all times, and the man has to be fed. Also, to keep the man, there was a requirement of prison or jail. That was also not proper, but still there was a cell or there was a jail usually used to keep a criminal for a day or a week. Why? Because some small offences were dealt in the story or in the kingdom. Now, not only the prison, but also the guard was required to watch the criminal all the times. since he was given a life imprisonment, and food must be provided to the criminal. He has to be fed, the man has to be fed. This is the problem. There was no arrangements, or there were no things are arranged to deal the criminals for life imprisonment. The yearly costs are calculated to be 600 francs, which would still necessitate an increase of taxes. But what did they do? They appointed a guard, and the guard would provide the food from a palace kitchen. So lucky the criminal, you know. Why? Because however the cell was arranged, the guard was appointed to watch the criminal, and also the criminal was provided, or he was fed by the palace kitchen. Whatever cooked for the palace, that was provided to the criminal. And what happened? A year spent. The king started to count or to look after the expenses and income. At that time, he comes to know the new item for the expenses. What was that? That was to keep up the criminal, to keep up the guard, or to keep up to provide food for the criminal. And yearly costs are calculated, and 600 francs was more. And where was that spent? The king comes to know that it was spent on a criminal. And the thing is, the criminal was so young and so healthy that he could live more than 50 years. This made the king to think about the criminal more, whether he has to keep him in prison or to give him any other kind of punishments. It is decided that the guard should be dismissed even at the risk of losing the prisoner. What to do? The king and his ministers, they were worried, they were tensed. They wanted it to do in some easy ways, and they also, before the imprisonment was given to the criminal, the decision was changed. Before the decision was changed from death sentence to the imprisonment for life, they asked even the soldiers to cut the head of the criminal, but those soldiers, they denied. Why? Because they were not trained to cut the head off. That's why finally he gave the imprisonment for life. I forgot to tell that point earlier. So now however the imprisonment of life is given, and king found the new source of expenses in his kingdom, and that is the keep up of the guard. The king was tensed. Why? Because he was still young and healthy. So he could live more than 50 years. That means it was a burden. Every year 600 francs, in the sense it was really a big burden to the kingdom. That's why the king was tensed, and he summoned, or he called the people, and he said to them that to deal the criminal in any other ways. Then it was decided in the meeting or in the hall that the guard should be dismissed even at the risk of losing the prisoner. So one of the ministers suggested, or he opined, that the guard must be dismissed. So the criminal will run away from the prison, so that they could get rid from the prisoner. This is what the king and the kingdom of Monaco, they wanted. They did not want to keep that criminal in the kingdom.